Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with Randal Pinkett, co-founder and CEO of BCT Partners and the author of the new book, Data-Driven DEI, and Gina Pisasale, Director of Equity and Organizational Culture at McCarter Theater in Princeton. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. This is a really important topic. I'm so pleased to have two experts on this topic to join us today. So let's start with Randal. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Who I am and what I do. I am a husband, I am a son, I'm a father, I am an entrepreneur, I am an author, I am a speaker, I am a 3 decades diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. I founded a company when I was in college with 3 of my college classmates that was doing diversity, equity, and inclusion before we called it diversity, equity, and inclusion. We were 21 and 20 at the time, the 4 of us, and now we are 52 and 51. So we've been together for 3 decades in this journey, and it has been an absolute blessing. Not only are we still together, but we still get along after those 30 years. And our company, we're all engineers by training. And so while we've always been doing diversity, equity, and inclusion, we've also married it with technology and data analytics and machine learning and artificial intelligence. So virtual reality is a measure of innovation that we've infused into the work we do in DI, and that's part of what differentiates us. So that's who I am, and that's what I do.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, Gina.
Great. Hi, I'm Gina Pisasale. I am the Director of Equity and Organizational Culture at the McCarter Theater in Princeton, New Jersey. I am a daughter and a wife and a mother. And I am Asian American as well. I identify very strongly in that area. And what I do at McCarter, I'm very much a dramaturg as well, which is a lot of intersectional storytelling in that kind of work. I am at this point in my world, intersecting stories that involve equity, anti-racism, and inclusion, and ask for that intersection among folks that I work with. Which translates into kind of designing and implementing, initiatives and practices and policies within a regional theater organization currently. And, it's really shifting kind of just relational frameworks and asking larger questions on why we do what we do and how can we do it better, who is not in the room, those kinds of things too. So
Great.
That's what I do.
Thank you. Okay, so Randal, you talked a little bit about, how you started in college, which is really amazing that you stayed together this long. That's really, as you know, I've studied family businesses, entrepreneurs, and anyone sticking together for that long and being productive and successful is really a testament to perseverance, right? And also your leadership. So talk to us, provide a little more context from your journey there, from college to now, because I'm sure it's gone ups and downs and in different directions to get to where you are now.
Absolutely. We started out just doing outreach to high schools to try to encourage minority students to attend college, because we were in college and figured we could give back. And then colleges started asking us, could you come speak to our students? And then corporations said, could you come talk to our interns? And then, this was the pivot point, corporations said, could you train our managers in how to work with minority talent? And that was the turning point for us for 2 reasons. A, because once you get corporate contracts, you're like, whoa, this is better than working at the student center. And second, now we have to bring some real rigor. Like, we're not just having conversations with our peers. We're training corporate managers on how to recruit, how to retain, and how to develop talent that might be different than themselves. And we have grown, we've made mistakes, we've learned, and we've evolved. And at some juncture, as I mentioned earlier, we said, well, this is wonderful work, but we are engineers. That's what we were trained to do. And so how can we bring and leverage our engineering talents in this work that we do? And that's when BCT Partners, which is the firm that we established, really began to embrace technology and data analytics. And now more recently, AI and machine learning and natural language processing and virtual reality as a way to glean some very powerful insights for our clients using these tools that can help them to make better decisions about how they can achieve the very diversity, equity, and inclusion that they so desire. And so it's been a journey, not a destination. We've been through thick and thicker together. But I am proud to say that, I didn't know then that we would last for 30 years. I'm so humbled and so grateful that we have made it through 30 years. It's just a great story of 4 Black men meeting in college, building a business that could do well and do good.
Great. And you did have some very famous hiccup or opportunity there. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Which one? I've had quite a few.
Well, this is the one that involves a former president.
Yes, that's the story I'll be telling my grandchildren. Granddad won a reality television show, and they're going to say, no way. I'm going to say, go ahead and Google it. They're going to say, oh, dude, you did win. That's right. You think I'm making this up? I won the 4th season of The Apprentice. And as a result, I worked for a year for Donald Trump, and I could not have found myself in an environment that was more counter to the culture that we've created at BCT Partners. I found the Trump organization to be unnecessarily combative, lacking in representation. I only saw a person who looked like me when I looked in the mirror in a leadership role. We did not welcome differing opinions. If you had a perspective that challenged the canonical view, then you were considered an outcast. I mean, it was antithetical to everything we talk about when it comes to not just the business case for diversity, equity, inclusion, but the personal case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it was a crash course for me. I mean, that was in my mid-30s that I did the show. So I really grounded myself in that experience and saying, what kind of leader do you really want to be? What kind of culture do you really want to create? Up to that point, it had been more organic, but thereafter, it was very intentional. Here's the kind of culture that I uphold, the philosophy that I believe, and that experience, while for some, they're like, what in the world? For me, it was enormously illuminating and grounding for that experience.
Wow. And let me just double click on that for a second. You know, when you look back, it was a while ago, do you have, not necessarily regrets, but did you leverage it as much as you possibly could? Are you pleased with how things turned out? Or did you ever look back and say, I wish I had done this or that?
Great question, Jim. I have absolutely no regrets from having been on The Apprentice. And it has been a tremendous boost to my entrepreneurial career. The exposure, the platform, the relationships. I often say that we live in a world now where celebrity is its own form of capital. Social capital is relationships. Financial capital is money. Celebrity capital, you can amass it and you can spend it. And we become drunk in our society with celebrity. People assume that I know things that I really don't know because I was on some reality TV show. I mean, I've been able to leverage it without question. And my finale was controversial when Donald asked me to share the title with the runner-up, and I was insulted and I thought it was racist, and the list goes on. But if I had to do it again, I would do it all again because it opened doors, and it's given me a platform for the work that matters, the work that we're here to talk about today. And I wouldn't be an author of 5 books, including Data-Driven DI. I wouldn't be speaking internationally. Arguably, Jim, we wouldn't be having this conversation if it were not for having been on The Apprentice.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's good to hear. Gina, now tell us, obviously you're in the arts and entertainment. Randal just mentioned the entertainment. Talk to us about your journey over
Yeah. I think like Randall, it's so wonderful hearing all of that. I think so many of us, that identify in certain kind of minority categories or kind of othered ways, recognize that and come into spaces and recognize that difference and know that we're wearing that and holding that difference. And that's what drives some of us into this work. I mean, that's what I heard about you and, your friends saying like, we are here and how can we now that we've gotten into this threshold, widen this threshold for others to join us, because sometimes we are the only, or we are one of the few. So I feel like that's also what drove me into this work as well. I'm an adopted son. I grew up in a white neighborhood, and I was very much the only. And I grew up in the Philadelphia suburbs, and we're a culture of fighters. So the way to get me to do something is to tell me that I can't. So, you say like, oh, well, being born in Korea, you cannot be president. Being, presenting in a certain way, you cannot be cast in this play. You cannot be in this space. You cannot. So this idea of like, well, why can't I? So there's this constant question of otherness, which drives, I think, my motivation into this field. I was in pre-med for a while, and in terms of just the curiosity of actually how my identity category and how I present in the story that my presentation, my body, but also my experience can tell in culture spaces and culture making in terms of like what can make social impact. Always like just curiosity of how can my experience actually lend itself to benefit in terms of civic engagement. Was always kind of my impulse. I found that in the theater and the arts, because I think in that space, we can literally sit people next to each other that have diametrically opposing thoughts and opinions about the world, and they're literally sitting next to each other. And then what does that give us? What's the challenge of that? But what's the opportunity for that as a way to gather people into conversations, to experience commonality in ways that I think are not assumed in this day and age. We're all kind of like leading with difference and cynicism. So I really use the arts as a site of activism for me. And especially kind of within this work, I get to articulate the why of that. I love that, talking about the Apprentice, you find yourself in spaces like, you use all of your experience to get into certain spaces, but then it's up to you to determine how you use that space based on your story and your experience. So I love that it's not the question of, following a certain formula after you enter, but asking like larger questions of like, okay, now I am here. And now what can I do for larger purposes of activism and civic engagement? So.
Right. Thanks, Gina. Okay. So Randall, talk to us about some of the, clearly you've seen a lot over the last 30 years, and changes in perspectives, changes in organizational culture. And then how did that come and sort of be illustrated in your new book? There's a lot to go through, but just sort of give folks sort of some idea. We must have made progress, but I have a feeling there's much more to do. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, and I want to honor Gina's journey as well. I share that experience of having been the only one or one of the few, and this othering effect that it has, and how we all come to these crossroads and make choices of how to respond. Life is not what happens to you, but how you respond to what happens to you. And yeah, we've seen, Jim, several changes in the landscape. One of my favorite excerpts from the book is nothing new. I'm not the first person to say this, but it's a friendly reminder that organizations do not change. People change. And we talk so much about the organizational case, the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I find that far less frequently do we talk about the personal case. The most popular radio station on the planet is WIFM. What's in it for me? And we all have to answer that why. It gets back to Gina's comments a moment ago, in fact. And so what I've seen is, I don't know if we've paid as much focus and attention on making the case to people for why they should care. I find that the order of operations is typically my organization cares, and they're telling me I should care. And I do care. But what if your organization doesn't care? You should still care. And so when I set out to write Data-Driven DEI, I set out with a very explicit premise. This book is not just for DEI champions and leaders and executives. It's for everyone, anyone who wants to be rigorous in how they engender more diverse relationships, embrace more inclusive behaviors, and demonstrate more equitable practices. And just like we put rigor on our nutrition and put rigor on our wellness, and oftentimes people say you should write down your goals because people who write them down are far more likely to achieve them, DEI is no different. And so the book is centered on people first and then organizations second. And we would all agree, if people are committed, the organizational piece will take care of itself.
Got it. Gina, talk to us about what you've seen in the art space, and then we'll come back to Randal a bit more.
Sure. I think, Randal, to respond to you as well, I always, folks say like the McCarter is, and like, this is, even when, there's like an us and them, even internally that happens sometimes. I'm like, no, you are the McCarter. We are the McCarter. Like an organization is only as good as the people that it brings together. And, diversity is only as good as how we deal with the differences among us. And I think, I know, kind of in the arts, it's so interesting. I'm in a regional non-for-profit theater, which are like three very distinct things. As a non-for-profit theater, the history of non-for-profit was to represent and to be of service to the community. So that's such a huge question in this day and age, when I think cultural discourse has only gotten competitive, and that there's such fear and like sense of loss of freedom, and that there's a zero-sum game kind of sensibilities. So what does it mean to serve a fractured community, as a regional non-for-profit theater? So how do we provide space, again, for people to laugh together, to have some type of common experience, right? How do we start there? How do we start in alignment instead of starting from difference? How do we build trust that we will meet you where you are, and then hopefully kind of show you something different and new that just sparks curiosity instead of cynicism. I think, from an internal perspective, I feel like your book addresses so much of, what's internal in terms of like corporate, as so there's no difference, necessarily from like an arts organization. I think, we still have interdepartmental, interpersonal, like a lot of the same conversations I think that are happening in the for-profit corporate world as well. But I would have to say that it gathers a group of very mission-driven artists and kind of perfectionists who prioritize their work in certain ways, who vision their work and as artists to be able to have civic impact, but also that holds themselves to a certain account in terms of that artistry, in terms of what it's saying. So there's very strong opinions that come into the spaces from, everyone that does like even like a props design to like a stage operator to somebody working in finance and HR and marketing and things like that too. So I'm finding in the arts world this kind of tension between meeting the demand to be a place of cultural trust and gathering, and the push to become more anti-racist, to become more equitable, to kind of make a statement in the community to that end, but also to meet people where they are, and to invite folks that are feeling fearful and anxious about their place in the world too. So I think the arts is such a wonderful nexus for that conversation and point of activism from a perspective, but it's, I think from an arts world, it's also hard to balance kind of just the demand of resources for that mission-driven work, and then to kind of add, equity, anti-racism into the value-driven work this day and age, because it feels so combative in this arena these days.
Do you see that, Randal, in your work? Do you work with nonprofits? I think you do, but arts specifically, what's your perspective?
I am seeing exactly what Gina described. And I can't say how much I appreciated her narrative a moment ago on meeting people where they are, and not exactly her words, but what I took from her words. And and honoring their fear, acknowledging their fear, and not vilifying that fear. Because I do believe that underlying what I'm calling, what others have called reversity, which is this organized resistance now to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I do believe that underlying that is fear. And that can come from two sides. There's the silent friends, that's Dr. King's words. We will remember the words, not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends who are afraid of getting into the conversation. And then there are those who are very much in the conversation, and Gina's laughing. And there's a sense of I'm losing something. Something's being taken from me. I'm being marginalized myself, and I'm afraid. Now, that's not the words that they're using, but that's the behaviors they're demonstrating. I'm afraid. And if, again, I'm saying what Gina said, if we don't meet them where they are, then we can't get anywhere. So yeah, Jim, I'm seeing it. And I think the arts, to Gina's point, I grew up in East Windsor, New Jersey. So the McCarter Theater is my theater. Let's be clear. That's my theater. The arts has and continues to be one of those wondrous, I'm not going to say places, but spaces where we can come together across difference in a world where those spaces are becoming increasingly rare. So yes, I'm tracking everything that Gina said in many ways.
Got it. And Randal, how do you see the differences between nonprofit organizations and corporates? Or is there a real difference? Talk to us about that.
Well, so let me break down DI in 4 dimensions, and then I'll explain where they differ. There's the workforce, the workplace, the marketplace, and the community. Workforce, workplace, marketplace, community. In the workforce and workplace, I would argue they're very similar, meaning they're all wrestling with hiring, recruiting, representation, advancement, culture, climate, creating an inclusive, workplace. Like every organization is hopefully seeking to be proactive and responsible in that regard. But when you get to the marketplace and the community, now I use marketplace because it's alliteration, workforce, workplace, marketplace. But marketplace, every organization has a marketplace. They have a customer, a stakeholder. For a nonprofit, it could be patrons. For a corporation, it could be customers. For a government agency, it could be residents of the community. But they all have a stakeholder to whom they are beholden. And in the marketplace, it differs dramatically. To bring an equity lens to government, or an equity lens to delivering healthcare, or an equity lens to financial services, very different. And then in the community, there can be some commonality, but depending on the nature of your work, how you engage, honor, and invest in community can also be very different. I mean, if I'm an athletics organization, then I might be engaging in the community in youth sports. If I'm a theater, I may be working with schools because I want young people to be exposed to the arts. So it can be very different in the marketplace and community, very similar in the workforce and workplace.
Got it. Thank you for that. And Gina, how have you seen from your past experience, how is that different from McCarter? Or is there a big difference from where you came from?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I think there's such a lens because of our current kind of cultural divide, because race and I think gender and disability and a lot of these identity categories have become such a lens for how we're seeing the work, so that I think this idea of kind of set identity categories, people are already coming in assuming that putting, for example, an Asian body or a Black body on stage, or an Indigenous body on stage, is making a kind of statement in a way that I think 20 years ago wasn't necessarily the case. There's the larger conversation of what it is to be liberal and woke, and the smallest gesture gets categorized in that. And I think it's getting harder and harder to have conversations because of the confirmation bias of see, that's exactly what they are trying to be, therefore they're on this side of the argument. So I mean, coming that's all I'm thinking of, is coming from the last place where I worked, where I was for 15 years as a resident dramaturg. the conversation has gotten more challenging, I think, because of the cultural divide and just the kind of discourse that is just getting people, I think, to be willing to enter with a certain degree of curiosity has gotten a lot much harder. um, but at the same time, it makes the work all the more, like, I think, critical. So I feel like that's the difference. But then how do we then, like, to what Randall is saying, allow people to meet each other as people? Because I think, we share so much more than we, there's so much more, we have so much more in common than we do in difference. So, I mean, I think this conversation, like, that's how I've seen kind of like the trajectory of actually creating theater, where like, every decision has to be thought out with this lens because of the judgment that people are already putting upon it that holds a certain weight that didn't really exist as heavily as before.
Wow, that's really interesting. So Randall, you talk about data, right? You talk about technology. Clearly, there's a lot of interest these days on new technology, specifically AI, and I know you mentioned it in your book. But talk to us about that topic and DEI, and what should we all be aware of?
We've often talked about making DEI a part of our DNA, which is this one-liner for saying build it into your being, your fiber, your organization and culture. Well, now I'm saying we got to make sure as we do that we keep our DNA in DEI, meaning as we're now seeing this ushering in of innovation, Chat GPT, AI, machine learning, natural language processing, virtual reality, et cetera. We got to make certain, and in fact, be intentional and vigilant that the tail is not wagging the dog, that humanity is embedded in how we train machine learning algorithms, how we ensure full representation in the data set for natural language processing, how when we're conducting surveys and focus groups and interviews and the like, that we make certain we aren't drawing conclusions off of qualitative or quantitative data that missed the marginalized groups. I mean, so we have to keep our humanity in all of this technology-driven context. Otherwise, the technology could very easily undermine and, in fact, work at odds with our very best efforts. And there's a great example I give in the book of Amazon designing an algorithm to try to recruit more women, but they trained it on their existing employee base, which was all men in leadership, which meant the algorithm was predicting it should hire more men. A perfect example. So I still like to say we have to maintain a level of technological literacy, all of us, to know and not let the technology lead the way, but to let our humanity lead the way, so that technology is but a tool that serves our purposes for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Got it. So let me just build on that a little bit. What's the proportion of fear to hope to progress, in this space with technology? Because a lot of people are scared, and for a lot of reasons, right? And so can you talk about that a bit more? How you're seeing things, put crystal ball over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna say it's 33% hope. You said fear, hope, and what was the third one? Progress. 33% hope, 33% progress, and 34% fear. I am definitely afraid that if our policy and professional environments are not able to get ahead of what is a very rapidly evolving AI endeavor, that we're going to find ourselves in a heap of trouble. If I had to predict, I would say that what we see lying ahead is not unlike what we've seen with social media. I mean, we think about the rapid proliferation of social media, how it's transformed our lives, to open up new possibilities, but also the need for regulation and debate. To Gina's points earlier, there's free speech, censorship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think we're heading down that same path. But I do think, unlike social media, the technology is evolving at such a rapid pace that it's likely to outstrip our ability to regulate it unto ourselves. And so I'm concerned, but that's why it requires not just DEI leaders to have their voice, but also for technology leaders to have a fuller appreciation for DI, that we can find ourselves in communication and dialogue with one another to find solutions that are reasonable, workable, and scalable.
Got it. And Gina, do you see that in your environment at all? Is tech and AI ever present, or is it something that's a little distant in the arts area?
No, I mean, I want to have hope that, to a certain extent, the live performing arts are one of the last batches where liveness is an imperative to the work itself. Projection design and folks are kind of investigating what it is. Just the digital advances I think in theater is making. That definitely the pandemic kind of forced us all to become video experts in video editing and all of the things too. But in terms of even just the larger projection work of bringing something that isn't necessarily there into the space and having conversations is definitely an interest. But I would say I would say on that kind of AI, Chat GPT, I feel like is not necessarily a tool that I see folks around me using often, or relying on for answers and things like that too. So it's still very much an interpersonal culture. So, but Randal, I think can I ask you a question actually about the kind of the more data driven, I think, coming from the humanities, coming from the arts.
Strategy is describing what you're going to do. The measure is how I will gauge progress. It's activity. How many workshops? How many courageous conversations? How many members of my employee resource group? But this makes clear the difference between outputs and outcomes. Outputs are intermediate results. That's activity, but it's not an outcome. An outcome is I have improved culture. I have self-reported lived experiences of members of the LGBTQIA community that they're more welcomed, feel like they belong. And so it is strategies and measures that focus on outputs. Objectives and goals focus on outcomes.
That's really helpful, I think, to really, because so many people, I think, ask me just where do we start? Where do we start? And to me, I'm always, you start with listening. And that's always hard. That's actually feels like, definitely easier said than done. For sure. So I think that one of the challenges too is that there's an idea of doing this right and wrong that I've been that I kind of come into too. And I think I come from also just a place of just being ready to fail and just try again. And I think I have a certain sensibility and kind of personality just to be able to do that, where that's crippling, I think, for some people. So I think just the larger conversation around what the incremental nature of this work, because I think people just have an idea of the right way to do it. And that's where I've come into my learning as well, that there's culture within an organization that is specific. And that if you listen, there's different things than what you come in and to assume by. So I guess I'm curious in your work with various organizations, if that there isn't the assumption of a one size fits all strategy for DEI work. And if you've felt you've had to challenge that, or if that's, when you come in with the 3 hour, even just day long workshop, what the challenge is to actually making it personal and unique to every organization.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many DEI assessments and strategies that we've done, and they are all different. It is not one size fits all. And I think a growing number of organizations and DI leaders recognize that. And it gets back to something you eloquently said earlier about meeting people where they are. One size fits all ignores the subtleties and the realities and the complexities of people and organizations. And any effective DEI assessment and DEI strategy, of which I recommend both to any organization, has to fundamentally be predicated on saying, we're going to tailor this to your unique needs, your unique positioning, your unique capacity of what you can get done and what you've done well and what you're needing to improve upon. And I think it also is the case for us as leaders, is to see our own strengths, our own limitations, and to be honest with ourselves about how it does take a team, it takes a village, all hands on deck in order to meet everyone where they are.
I think what I've also been finding is that, I did EDIA kind of consultancy work as well. That kind of picked up definitely during the pandemic because of just the cultural imperative to being able to frame anti-racism using just like baseline definitions, kind of like just de-escalation skill sets and, decolonization frameworks and things like that too. And what I've been finding now, being in an organization for 18 months now, is just the consistent kind of muscle building that you need to do. Because you can have, for example, a manager training. This is one of the feedback that I got as one of the strengths of McCarter was for our what's the strength of our managers. So we had like an ABA manager training, right? So we had this training over 3 weeks, and then it hasn't necessarily been picked up since then. So it's this idea of like introducing this idea and having this conversation, but it needs to actually make any kind of significant cultural shift. It needs to be continually revisited and continually strategized and continually put into the scaffolding of progress towards this work. So which I'm finding now, kind of having a leadership position of this work in general, is that I need to design long-term. And I don't know, like if you, like when you come into companies, you're being brought in for, kind of like cultural assessments and then advisement for potential strategy building after that. But I'm curious if people have like brought you back after a year, or like how have you helped people with that like long-term conversation?
Yeah, the best analogy for our role is like your physician. We're always available when you need us. We might come in and give you a physical, but sometimes, if not oftentimes, people come back and say, you know what, my shoulder is bothering me. Could you take a look at it? And we say, yeah, we'll take a look. Oh, yeah, you have a problem with your shoulder. Here's some recommendations of what you could do. You need an employee resource group. Oh, you need to do some anti-racism training. Oh, you need to facilitate some courageous conversations. And it's a journey, as you aptly articulated, not a destination.
This has been a great conversation. Can you share just one tip for all of us to be a more inclusive leader?
Gina, I'll follow you.
Oh gosh. I would say to lead with feelings of abundance rather than feelings of scarcity or fear, because there's no joy or growth down that path. There is such great wisdom among you already that you don't even recognize just yet. And to continue to be curious about everything that comes into your spaces and your doors, and to lead with that curiosity rather than almost a solution mindset all of the time. Lead with curiosity and let collaboration and abundance lead.
Randal?
Yep, I would offer up one of Stephen Covey's principles from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. Gina commented earlier about the divisiveness and the noise, and people are hearing, but they're not listening. And if we can operate from a place of trying to understand someone else's perspective, not for them to understand ours, but for us to understand their perspective, see the world through their eyes, put ourselves into their shoes, whether you agree with them or not. The goal of a debate is to win. The goal of a discussion is to decide. The goal of a dialogue is to understand. That's it. So we can all engage in dialogue. We'll have to debate. We'll have to discuss. Just dialogue to understand each other. So I can see the world the way that you see it. That's the first step toward empathy, and it's the first step toward finding common ground, because people are far more likely to move from their position when they know that you appreciate and understand theirs.
Great. Those were great tips. All right. So this has been, again, really insightful. Thanks for joining us today. We usually end with a poem or a quote or a saying. Gina, would you like to kick us off here?
Asking an artist to express big idea with one quote. When I got your email this morning, I was like, oh my goodness, what to choose from? The great James Baldwin, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Always comes to mind. But I would like to offer something from the world of art and artists. From a director, a famous Russian director, his name is Konstantin Stanislavski. Was very important in the Moscow art theater movement at the turn of the 20th century. So his quote is, and not only must your love of art, a love that is without fear or reproach, be the foundation of your life's career, but you must also be in love with something or somebody every day, with a picture, a flower, a song, a person, a profile you saw by chance, which reminded you of Aphrodite and helped you people your creative circle today with new glittering images, a landscape, or a football match, which produced in you a feeling of energy, with anything you like, so long as your spirit is always in a state of exhilaration, that the ordinary everyday life that surrounds you has always the power to light a spark in you.
Lovely. All right, Randall, go ahead.
All right, so I'm going to do a quick excerpt from one of my favorite TED Talks, and then I'm going to close on my quote. But I would be remiss if I did not ask your listeners and viewers to go to DATA-DRIVEN.com, because there you will find free tools, templates, resources, best practices, and case studies of people and organizations that have used data to drive their DEI efforts. One of my favorite TED Talks is The Politics of Fiction by a Turkish storyteller, Elif Shafak. And she says, we all live in some kind of a social and cultural circle. We're all born into a certain family, race, ethnicity, class, and nation. But if we have no connection whatsoever with the worlds beyond the one we take for granted, then we can suffer the equivalent of a social and cultural death. And what she's saying is, when we don't go beyond our social and cultural echo chamber outside of our community of the like-minded, we close ourselves off to growth. We close ourselves off to all of what the world has to offer. And so my quote, which is in some ways the antithesis to the picture that she's painted, which she addresses in her TED Talk, is the following: that we are not meant to see through each other, but to see each other through. Now, that quote is unknown, but it's one of my favorite quotes of all time. So I'm inviting everyone to come together across all of the dimensions that might divide us, but can actually unite us. And I believe diversity has the potential to destroy our democracy, but I think it also has the potential to save our democracy. But that will only be if we not see through each other, but see each other through.
Wonderful. Oh my God, that is so powerful. Thank you guys so much. This has been wonderful. Really appreciate you spending the time and educating us. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.